Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Trebas Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
A big step forward today in dealing with the sewage crisis plaguing the southern border. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi, and that step involves a piece of infrastructure critical to the proper functioning of the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. And KPBS reporter John Carroll is live near the plant with more on the new construction. John?
Maya, this treatment plant is a big
Well, let's face it, a lot of us have just been waiting for the sun to go down, get rid of the heat. Tonight, 63 in the city, which is mild. As we turn the page into October, do we change things up at all? The forecast ahead.
And we apologize for those technical difficulties. We'll try to get back with John in a few minutes. Now to the latest on Helene. At least 119 people have died across 6 states so far, with hundreds of people still unaccounted for. Laura Geary has more from Charlotte on storm aftermath being described by some as post-apocalyptic.
It's just really horrifying. It's sad because there's still people there that are really hard to get to.
Several communities in western North Carolina remain virtually isolated Monday, cut off from life-sustaining supplies and medical care, days after Hurricane Helene decimated large parts of the southeast.
There is no commercial or retail water available in our city.
The mayor of Weaverville finding a small window of cell phone service Monday morning. His town, like those nearby, in desperate need of things like water, food, fuel, and communications.
6,000 people have responded to a website we have where you can request to be hooked up with your missing family.
Many of the missing may be found when wireless service is restored, but a grim reality remains.
We've heard accounts of people seeing houses floating down the river with people in them. So we know that death toll will rise.
Hundreds of roads remain closed Monday with damage on a scale that could take years to repair. Historic and beloved towns, lakes, national parks, forever changed.
This is a demarcation line. It will be completely different going forward.
A message from President Joe Biden Monday. Help is coming.
I've directed my team to provide every available resource as fast as possible to your communities.
But for many storm victims right now, survival is hour by hour.
We don't know where we go from here. We don't know where everybody else goes from here.
In Charlotte, North Carolina, I'm Laura Aguirre reporting.
Few of us love to sit down and talk about all of the bad things that could happen to us, but the federal government says there's no time like the present to do so. In a few minutes, we go over the steps recommended by the federal government your family should take in the case of a natural disaster. 3 local firefighters involved in a vehicle crash near the border of Louisiana and Texas were recognized by the president today.
I want to thank all the first responders and everyone who's been working around the clock. One of the brave teams who's volunteered to be there is from San Diego County Fire Department, set to travel all the way from California to North Carolina to help. But on their way, they were in a terrible car accident in Louisiana. We pray for their full recovery, but it was a bad accident.
And that group was part of a task force on their way to North Carolina to help with Hurricane Helene rescue efforts. And the group left San Diego on Friday as part of a 48-member team with 7 other agencies. A battalion chief and 2 captains were injured while traveling in a Ford F-350 pickup truck. The other vehicle involved was a large 18-wheeler.
Devastating. And it's not something that we ever want to hear in any position in the fire department is to hear one of our own that is injured. Our job is to go out there and help people, not be part of an incident.
And the fire department tells our media partner KGTV that staff and family of those injured are heading to Louisiana, while the remaining members of the task force wait for orders in Texas. The president added that he will continue to surge resources, including food, water, communication, and life-saving equipment into the area. A piece of infrastructure critical to the proper functioning of the South Bay International Wastewater Treatment Plant. That's what we were talking about earlier. And now we go to KPBS reporter John Carroll, who is live near the plant with more on the new construction. John.
Maya, the treatment plant is behind me. That's what we're talking about. And it's a big piece of the critical infrastructure that is critical to solving, eventually, the sewage crisis down here. Now, today, they held that groundbreaking on what some are referring to as the plant's front door. The piece of infrastructure we're talking about is known as Junction Box 1. It is the mechanism the plant uses to control the amount of flow coming in from Mexico. It was badly damaged in 2021, but now it's on its way to being functional again. Federal, state, and local leaders were on hand for the groundbreaking today. And if you've been following our coverage of the situation down here, you probably know that officials at all levels of government have for months been calling on the Biden administration and on Governor Newsom to declare a state of emergency here. California's Secretary of Environmental Protection, Yana Garcia, says the Newsom administration has been fully behind efforts to solve the sewage problem, but she also says a state of emergency isn't needed.
The truth is, right now, there is nothing that would be unlocked by a declaration of a state of emergency. And so the practical nature of making that declaration wouldn't have an impact. What will have an impact is the ongoing advocacy to make sure that we have full funding for the expansion of this treatment facility.
That view is not shared by someone who's on the front lines here. Imperial Beach Mayor Paloma Aguirre, that's Imperial Beach Mayor, Paloma Aguirre. Though Secretary Garcia may be technically correct, Aguirre maintains that a direct declaration is very worthwhile.
There is a benefit to declaring a state of emergency, and it's sending a very clear signal to the White House, to President Biden's administration, that this is a priority, beyond just a letter, beyond just a visit, that this is indeed a full-blown public health crisis.
Now, this is just the first step in many phases of repairing and eventually expanding this plant. Cost estimate for all of it is about $700 million, and of that, only $400 million has been committed so far. Maya?
The question, do we know when the repairs to Junction Box 1 are supposed to be complete?
We do. It's supposed to be completed by next spring, and when that happens, that will allow the plant operators to cap the amount of sewage that comes in every day at 25 million gallons. That is what their license calls on them to be able to do. But something else that Mayor Aguirre pointed out to me that she says is very important. All the repairs and expansion in the world to that plant won't do anything to stem the problem from the Tijuana River. She says eventually the river is going to have to be diverted so that they can put the water through treatment before putting it back into the river. But that's way down the road. Maya.
Report, John. Vice presidential nominees, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, are gearing up for a high-stakes debate tomorrow. Our Washington correspondent Julia Benbrook takes a look back at how each of them were selected and what they bring to the table.
During a fast-tracked selection process, Vice President Kamala Harris chose Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. It was her first major decision at the top of the Democratic ticket.
Let us fight for the promise of our future.
On the campaign trail, the 60-year-old is leaning into his background as a teacher and a high school football coach, as well as his time in politics that spans almost 20 years, serving in Congress and as governor.
You look at Governor Walz, the reason why it's smart pick, the reason why he was picked is to bridge that cultural divide, to reach out to constituencies that the Democratic Party's had problems, reaching.
When it comes to former President Donald Trump's pick, he took his time and built suspense. After months of consideration, he selected Ohio Senator J.D. Vance.
But I'm thrilled to have a new friend and partner fighting by my side.
The 40-year-old has less debate experience, but has spent plenty of time in the national spotlight, coming on the political scene after writing a New York Times bestseller in 2016 and winning a crowded Senate primary in 2022.
The reason he was selected was to be the MAGA heir apparent. He was the one who was going to continue on the MAGA. So, of course, he's combative. He's aggressive. That's the style. He is reflective of the top of the ticket.
Reporting in New York, I'm Julia Benbrook.
A record number of Californians have registered to vote for the November presidential election, and that is according to a recent report by Secretary of State Shirley Weber. More than 22 million people are registered. That's up more than 1 million from this time just 4 years ago. Weber says the more people learn about the voting process, the more likely they are to vote. Her office held a series of webinars to familiarize voters with what's on the ballot. The latest took place this afternoon.
We want to make sure that they understand the voters information guide, which is a huge guide this year, much larger than it has been in some of the other years, with lots of information on it. So we're trying to make sure that they understand that there's a lot of resources available to them to help them to vote.
Both webinars are available for playback on the California Secretary of State website. When elected leaders undermine the very institutions and norms designed to keep them accountable, democracies can die from within. That is a key premise of the 2018 book, How Democracies Die. As part of our ongoing Public Matters series, Amita Sharma spoke with the co-author earlier today.
Professor Ziblatt, thank you so much for joining us. Your most recent book, Tyranny of the Minority, states that political parties in democracies must follow 3 principles. What are they?
To be a politician committed to democracy, to be loyal to democratic principles, means 3 simple things, actually. One, that you accept election losses, you accept the results of elections, win or lose. Number 2, that you do not use violence, threaten violence, or incite violence to try to gain and to hold on to power. And then rule number 3, just as critical, maybe a little more complicated, is that if you're a politician or a political party and you have people who violate those first 2 rules in your own midst, your own allies, you have to expel them from your party.
So how would you rate American democracy on these 3 principles?
Well, throughout our history, there have been moments where politicians have threatened violence and acted recklessly, but what's really rare about the current moment is that for an election for the highest office in the land, for the presidency of the United States, we have a candidate Trump, who just on January 6th alone didn't accept the results of an election after all the various legal channels of challenging the election results had already been exhausted, and who, by account of the committees that have investigated this, incited violence on January 6th. So in that sense, we have one candidate for office who has violated those 2 basic principles. And then I think perhaps most, that's about a single individual. What perhaps most shocking is that since that event, although there was some condemnation of it by the Republican Party after January 6th, by and large, the Republican Party has really talked out of both sides of its mouth. As many leaders in the Republican Party have said, that the participants in January 6th need to be pardoned, and this kind of stuff, which in effect is excusing violence. And people have real difficulty seeing that Joe Biden actually won the election fair and square. And so given all of that, I think there's signs that our democracy is in trouble.
So what reforms are needed to strengthen U.S. democracy?
We live in a very old constitutional system. There's great things about our Constitution. But we have to remember our Constitution was written in the 18th century, and there's things such as the Electoral College, which every 4 years seems to bring us into crisis. So, we think actually eliminating the Electoral College would be a great thing. The use of the filibuster holds up legislation on a regular basis, blocking the will of majorities. Lifetime tenure for Supreme Court justices. These are all unique features of our Constitution that have led us to our current moment.
And what happens if they're not implemented?
Well, other democracies throughout history have amazingly implemented all of these reforms. We're the only democracy in the world today with an electoral college. Other democracies used to have electoral colleges for selecting the presidents. Argentina was the last country to get rid of this in 1994. Every other democracy in the world has term limits or retirement ages for their Supreme Court justices, and no other democracy has a filibuster-like rule that we do.
How does democracy fare in the short term, and what role do regular citizens play in how this all unfolds?
Yeah, it's really essential to focus on what citizens can do, because democracy, of course, at the end of the day is ruled by the people, and so people play a critical role. Our institutions won't save us. We have to save our democracy ourselves. I think in the short run, what's really clear is that people who are committed to democracy from across the political spectrum have to join forces to defend democracy and form broad coalitions supporting candidates and parties that are committed to democracy.
So here in San Diego County, we've seen attempts to censor books in schools and libraries, threats against public officials, and just general rudeness at public government meetings. How do these symptoms play in the larger context of our democracy?
Well, one of the underlying unwritten rules of a democracy is that you accept those that you disagree with as legitimate contenders for power. And so what that means is that even if you disagree with somebody and maybe even dislike somebody, at least in public and in the public square, you recognize that other people have a right to compete for office, and if they beat you, to govern. That's the essence of democracy. And so this unwritten rule or a norm is essential. And I think what one sees in a context of increased polarization, where you view the other side as not just a rival, but really as an enemy, you'll go to extreme measures to keep that person from power. And so that's one thing I think that we're witnessing. But the other thing that you mentioned about the banning of books, we have to remember that to be a democracy, as I said before, it's about competition, free and fair competition for office. It's about people being able to participate in politics, but it's also about basic civil liberties: freedom of press, freedom of association, and freedom of conscience, and freedom of the books that you want to read, the books that you want to read. And so, when you have politicians and political leaders attacking those basic civil liberties, including the right to read the books that you want to read, then democracy is facing serious challenges.
Professor Ziblatt, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you.
And as a reminder, you can find all of our Public Matters stories, events, and more online. Just go to kpbs.org/Public Matters. September is National Preparedness Month, and with 1 day left, FEMA wants you to start a conversation to be ready for the worst. According to the Insurance Information Institute, natural catastrophe losses in 2022 in the U.S. totaled $114 billion. The federal government says in order to prepare, gather important documents such as birth certificates to insurance policies, photograph or scan them, and then put them in a waterproof container. And be sure to know what your insurance covers and what it does not.
Otherwise, you could suffer a loss from a hurricane, a tornado, a wildfire, and you have a gap in coverage, meaning your home has been destroyed, you're not going to get enough money to replace it.
And you can get in-depth checklist of what to do now to prepare at the website ready.gov. And it includes tips ranging from having extra cash to handle emergency expenses to making sure your pet is microchipped in case you get separated. And when you're packing your emergency kit, don't forget to pack one for pets as well. The San Dieguito Lagoon is once again home to wetlands and endangered species. KPBS reporter Katie Anastas says the restoration project is meant to protect both coastal cities and wildlife.
The project has restored more than 80 acres of wetlands and salt marsh between Del Mar and Solana Beach near Interstate 5. Much of the area had been used for agriculture.
It's a big day. I mean, what was here before was rows and rows of always, it seemed to be, dried out tomato plants. So to have been watching over the year or so of this restoration, to see it go from that to this is a stunning transformation.
Replacing the wetlands involved removing enough soil to fill 333 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Invasive plants were also removed and replaced with native ones, restoring habitat for several endangered bird species.
One of the biggest challenges we have in the state of California is the continuing loss of wetlands. And wetlands, we have now learned, is a very important part of our ecosystem, of the water quality, of what goes from the development out to the ocean. And so creation of wetlands is kind of the new strategy that we have to replace those we lost.
Replacing wetlands can also help coastal communities brace for rising sea levels.
Basically, what we've created is an opportunity for when that sea level rise happens, that there is some place for the water to go, not threaten our public infrastructure or private development.
Sandag, Caltrans, and the San Dieguito River Park Joint Powers Authority worked together on the $87 million project. Funding came from federal sources and local tax revenue. The project also created a new trail along the El Camino Real that improves access to nearby trails. It'll eventually be part of a trail leading from the coast to Julian. Katie Anastas, KPBS News.
Get ready for the Padres postseason. After winning the series against the Diamondbacks this weekend, the Padres will host a wild card playoff series at Petco Park tomorrow evening. And that is where KPBS reporter Alexander Wynn is standing by live. Alex.
Hey, that's right. Hey, that's right, Maya. As you can see, the team is out here getting some practice in. Now, this is supposed to be a rebuilding year for the Padres, but here we are in the playoffs. Now, earlier today, we found out that the Padres will be playing the Braves for the Wild Card Series, and we talked to some fans who are excited that they are back in the playoffs.
October ready.
Fans like Robin Brainerd flocked to the Padres store in downtown today to grab some merch to support the team tomorrow.
We'll be sitting out in the Petco porch tomorrow and Wednesday, and hopefully not Thursday because we're going to win 2 in a row.
The Friar faithful has been a season ticket holder since 1994. Chuck Merriman, another season ticket holder, was also there grabbing some gear for himself and his son for tomorrow's game.
He was actually born on opening day 3 years ago, so got to get the little guy his shirt, you know.
He is excited that the Padres are back in the playoffs again this year after missing them last year and are playing at home, but he's already looking toward the division series.
Obviously, we can't wait to see those Dodgers and take them out again like in 2022.
As you can see, the team are still practicing outside. Now, with 93 wins this season, it is the best season since 1998, where that team won 98 games and went to the World Series. And this year's team is hoping to get some championship wins out of this. And Maya, I know that you are a huge baseball fan, so I got you this at the store early today. It says, October ready. Now I want to ask you, are you October ready? Back to you, Maya.
Talking about the days to come, I wish I had better news for us because we'd like to get rid of that heat in several spots, and we're just not going to. The hot pattern continues for us. If you're towards the coast, of course, the marine layer does at least limit how hot we get. But there will also be some areas of smoke and haze possible throughout the day from some of those Southern California wildfires, especially as you work your way north towards the Los Angeles area. That's where we'll be challenged with some of that smoke and haze drifting down from. So as we take a look across the region tonight, 63 the low in the city, 57 in Oceanside, 73 in Borrego Springs, but it's really about those daytime numbers that are challenging. It's why we have heat advisories, excessive heat warnings in place, not just as we go through tomorrow, but even in some spots for several days throughout a good chunk of the week here. So welcome to October. We're talking about temperatures well above historical average. 93 in Escondido tomorrow, while the city holds on to 77. Borrego Springs, 112 for that forecasted high. Ramona hitting 100 degrees, and even Mount Laguna makes it to the upper 70s. So a very warm time for us, if not just downright hot for so many locations. Coastal communities holding on to the 80s as we head through the middle of the week. Could there be some change up on Friday? Certainly, but it's not a lot. Basically, we don't have a ton of variation there. Inland communities, you'll find the 90s and even upper 90s for Wednesday. That's kind of the peak of the heat for us before we taper things off towards Friday. But not everyone gets that relief on Friday. In fact, mountain locations, we actually could be a little bit warmer as we keep things fairly bright. You'll find those numbers holding on to the 70s, if not at times lower 80s throughout the course of the week. And as we go into those desert communities, 100 plus, close to that 110 range. In a few locations, there'll be the 110 to 115 range as we talk about those numbers getting awfully high for the beginning of October. For KPBS News, I'm AccuWeather meteorologist Melissa Constanzer.
Day of the Dead is a beloved tradition devoted to celebrating death, life, and memories of loved ones that we've lost. South Bay engagement producer Helene says KPBS's digital community, Ofrenda, or altar, is back this year and shares details on how to participate.
Día de Muertos, or Day of the Dead, is a celebration of life and death. The Aztecs and the Toltecs believed mourning the dead was disrespectful. They viewed death as a natural phase of life. So they continued to see the dead as members of the community, alive in memory and spirit. In Mexico and other Central American countries, it is believed that during Day of the Dead, departed loved ones return to the earth to visit us and enjoy the altars we built for them on this day. At KPBS, we're getting ready to celebrate this tradition, and we want to give you a space to remember and celebrate your loved ones. For the second consecutive year, KPBS is organizing a digital community altar where you can share a memory of someone you wish to remember this upcoming Day of the Dead. Go to kpbs.org/Day of the Dead to fill out our form. You can share an audio clip, a video, text, and a photo. You can also call 619-630-8516 and leave a voice or text message. The deadline to send your ofrenda is October 23rd. Helene Castellanos, KPBS News.
And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.